fun. John, my own path to regenerative economics started with learning about the polycrisis, and I noticed that when I talk about that, people actually get it faster than they get why climate change alone is important.
Mm,
So I wonder if you can talk to us about what the polycrisis is and what does it mean about our current economic system.
sure. Well, first, thank you, Inbal and Eugene, for the invitation. And I'm honored that I've had a little bit of influence in the direction of your amazing network and organization. And it's great to see so many faces, most of them new, which is always good. A couple familiar, but mostly new faces. So on the poly crisis, maybe just a quick definition for people who are not familiar. It's this idea that we are now experiencing a series of interconnected, cascading crises that cross from economics to social to ecological, many ecological crises, to now the political, and that they're not separate crises. They're interconnected, and they have feedback loops upon each other, both within the sectors and then across the sectors. And the first time I came across this feeling of a polycrisis, I'll share a brief story. I was learning system science I was in a small workshop with Dennis Meadows, who was the lead scientist on the Limits to Growth study, published in 1973, just to put this all into context. I was with him, it was probably 2004, and he did this exercise. We taught us about feedback loops and systemic crises and sort of what triggers collapse. And after the exercises, one of the participants said, "So Dennis, how will we know when we've reached collapse?" And of course, put yourself back in 2004. There was no polycrisis in our consciousness. And Dennis said, "Oh, that's easy. The first thing to go will be our ability to cope." And so the polycrisis that we're experiencing feels like we have an inability to cope. We have an inability to even know where to start in wrestling with the problems. And the reason for that is the problems are really symptoms. And the root cause of the crisis is much deeper than climate change. It's much deeper than ecological crises, and it's all connected. And so it's literally impossible for us to hold in our head as a series of problems to solve. So I suspect that resonates with most of us as we get up in the morning and try to figure out what the hell's going on in the world.
Yeah, thanks, John. I also, so for me, I heard about it on a podcast by Daniel Schmachtenberger, where he was also saying, look at all these crises. Any one of them can end civilization as we know it, and we're not nowhere on track to addressing even one of them. So that was kind of scary. I guess the good news is that we will soon hopefully realize today that these are the same crisis. These are heads of the
Mm,
same hydra. And
mm,
I
yeah.
promise to people who are listening to this that this is the darkest part of today's talk, and things things are going to be up from here. But for the moment, I will actually hand over to Inbal for an activity for us.
Mm.
I was
Inbal,
on
you're on
mute.
mute.
Yeah, there we go. Yes, give me a second. I want to share my screen here so that you all can see. Um, so this activity is inspired by Vanessa Machado de Oliveira's work from Hospicing Modernity, which
Mm,
invites us to honestly examine all the tensions that we carry as we unlearn the old ways of thinking and grow into new ones. And so you see this list of statement in front of you, and a lot of these statements are contradicting each other. And what we want to do here, I would invite you to just write in the chat, read through these, write in the chat which of these beliefs or opinions you're holding at the same time. And the purpose isn't really to resolve the contradictions, but it's to notice them and to surface them and to approach them with curiosity. And yeah, by surfacing these tensions, we better understand the complexity that is inside all of us, and we create space for deeper reflection. So, yeah, my invitation is to read this and just type into the chat what resonates for you at the same time. See a lot of ones here, a lot of threes. Two and four is an interesting combination. Yes. This kind of like, there's a lot of action in this group. We just need to do it.
Hmm.
Mm. I
Yeah,
also
I
see some
also
fours here.
yeah, I
Yeah, go
very
ahead.
much encourage people to look at other people's answers and think, interesting. Other people are holding this combination of contradictions, and I'm holding this combination. And I second and Val that like the skill, the ability to hold multiple contradictory things at once, it is actually a core skill that we need as we manage
Hmm.
complexity of this level. So
Yeah.
this is an exercise in that.
Um, I want to invite, I see I just want to call out that there was someone, Adam Winston, who added another option for seeking for a different economic system seems overwhelming. Oh, it's the same one, number six.
Mhm.
But I think he added a little bit to it. Adam, I'm curious if you want to share a little bit your opinion of why you chose this one.
Yes, I think along the lines of, there are challenges within the, capitalistic system which need to be addressed. However, I think in an effort to try and accomplish other goals, there's a tendency to be like, okay, we need to start from scratch. And I think even those intentions are noteworthy, they don't seem to be kind of realistic. So I prefer to kind of think of, working within the system, based on number three. Um, and we can realize that there's challenges, but if we look at, what are the motivations, who are the players, how can you participate, and looking at incremental improvements over the long run, then it doesn't seem to be too overwhelming. So I'd rather say, what is the current system? Where are the challenges? How do we meet them? And let's find a practical, um, way of addressing them, and then start on that journey. And then knowing that these little kind of steps will help us eventually get to our goal. And we're making progress and hopefully setting the stage for future generations to be involved in well as well.
Yeah, so what I hear in what you're sharing there is that this problem is huge. It's so big.
Yes.
And at the same time, that feels overwhelming. So maybe we make these incremental changes, but we need this huge change to to happen. And the way to manage it is maybe the belief that you're holding is that we should make these incremental changes because that makes it more manageable.
Yeah, more manageable, more realistic, and not to change our destination, but change the way in which we want to approach it, and not say, okay, let's just scrap and try something new because it has unintended consequences. Let's say, okay, what can we do, and then determine on how we can act. And it may be small, but our goal is still in mind.
Thank you, Adam. I'm curious if someone else wants to jump in and talk about the conflicting beliefs that they hold. Just raise your hand and jump right in. Oh, Scott, go ahead.
So for me, I think I always think about solving the climate crisis as like a resource allocation problem and nothing more than that, right? And the resources are like time, money, and materials. And so for me, the conflict was number one and number two. Like I think if people are prioritizing their time and money, they can have the most impact possible already in today's economy. But not enough people think that way or know what is the most impactful thing they can do with their time or money. And so that's why you need the right leadership or the right economic system to coach people through that. I think what a lot of people do, either as individuals or organizations, is they follow what other people have been trying to do for the last 10 to 20 years on some small incremental behavioral changes. And as we all know, that's not been enough for a long time. And so it's actually like take a fresh look at what's the most impactful thing I can do with my time or money. What's the most impactful thing my organization can do with their time or money, and focus on that.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. So the conflicting conflict there is the conflict between the individual and the leaders. Who is responsible here? Who can
I
lead
mean,
the
the answer is
program?
everybody, but I think
Yeah,
more individuals need to actually act
yeah.
now instead of point at politicians or CEOs. Act where you can and know where you can, and then influence others to do the same, whether it's other peers at an individual level or other peers at an organizational level.
Thank you, Scott. For the rest of the people who have their hands raised, Joanne and Claire, we're gonna have another round of this. So I'm gonna move us, but if you guys want to talk next time, you'll be first in line.
Awesome. Well, yeah, John, let's move to talking more about what regenerative economics actually is. I wonder if you can recall a conversation where you explained it to somebody who is very skeptical and to whom it is not so easy to explain it. So how did you get through to them in the end? How do you explain it to your most skeptical audiences?
Well, one of the things I've learned over the last decade is to search for audiences that are less skeptical,
Mm.
because this is a worldview shift. It's not all that different than a shift in one's religious beliefs. And so you don't, I don't think you convince someone that the regenerative economy is the solution we're looking for. I think they need to be hungry to learn it or to see it. And in fact, my experience is most people that get this, they already understand it at some base intuitive level. And what I'm able to do is help them make sense, connect dots. But it's like an aha because they already know it. And I'm about 0 for 500 in convincing a quote unquote successful CEO, financier, tech mogul, billionaire that the system by which they became successful is fundamentally flawed. And therefore, there's something fundamentally flawed about the identity that they've defined for themselves. So, with that as a caveat, maybe there's two words, regenerative and economics. And I threw in in the chat, one of the things I've discovered in my courses is that, normal people don't really have a shared understanding of what economics means, or the economy, or what's the difference between economics and economy. And so let me just start with that. And in the chat, I neglected to mention households and consumers. Uh, but essentially, because we've moved our culture so strongly in the direction of organizing it around economics, it's hard to find, as someone mentioned, it's hard to point to something that's not part of the economy. I mean, even church, our religion, survives within the context of an economy. You go to church or you go to your place of worship, and you have to write a check to keep the place going. And so it actually would be difficult to think of something beyond our personal meditation time or time we spend doing art or raising our children, but even that is affected by the economy. It's really quite hard to find something that's not part of the economy. Certainly, all government activities that involve money are part of the economy. Certainly, every business is part of the economy. Every philanthropy, every civil society organization, the United Nations, I mean, they're all part of the economy to some degree. And so when I talk about economics, I'm talking about how we organize and govern our society. And it should be, it more accurately should be called regenerative political economy, or regenerative meta economy or something like that. Um, as to the word regenerative, and this word has now becoming a bit popular, which is good and bad, but it has a scientific meaning in the field of living system science. Um, Maybe I'll just draw on Fritjof Capra, who's a very well-known and renowned. He's a physicist turned living system science and consciousness, scientist. But he just recently, like a year ago, wrote a paper, a short paper, very accessible, um, sort of summarizing his 30 years of thinking about living systems. And he said you can reduce living systems into four principles. The first is the structure, which is the web of life he talks about. The network is the structure, as opposed to a hierarchy. The second principle he talks about is he says life is inherently regenerative, which to my knowledge was the first time he literally summarized the what I would call the process of life in that single word. But that's how I understand it. I'm a banker by background, as you know, but from my study, regeneration is the process that describes how life works. Nothing, nothing more than that, but nothing less. It's profound. It's beyond comprehension, but that's what it means. The third is that life is inherently creative, which is kind of cool to think about. And the fourth, which blows my mind, is that life is inherently intelligent. And that's based on scientific evidence, not, sort of woo-woo kind of thinking. So regeneration is profoundly important. It's this idea that explains how this amazing magical thing we call life actually works. And so, at its very base level, regenerative economics or regenerative political economy is the idea that we need to that the economy is a living organism too, made up of living organisms we call human beings, and their tools and technology. So technology sits within the economy, absolutely, as I use the term. And there are patterns and principles that we've discerned from our scientific study of living systems that describe how living systems work. Think of them as there are laws in physics. In living systems, there are patterns and principles, first principles, not ethical principles, like design principles, like things that need to be true. And
Absolutely.
and then finally, if the human economy is to be, quote, sustainable, whatever that means, if it is to participate in this process of life and not collapse in a polycrisis, then its architecture and its design principle and its design needs to align with these same patterns and principles. That's the whole idea,
Yeah,
which I actually think is like a self-evident truth. How to do it is the hard part, but that theory or that hypothesis is false. I would love to hear the challenge to that hypothesis because it seems to me that it's self-evident truth.
yeah, I really like that framing, John. That also resonates with like one of the ways that I like to explain what regenerative economy is. Indeed, it's a way of observing that the economy is a living system, and living systems are economies at the same time because they exchange resources and signals with each other. And so, if we look at a living system like the Amazon rainforest that's been around for tens of millions of years, nobody, not even Elon Musk or Peter Thiel, can say that the current economic system will have that kind of claim to fame. So it is a regenerative economy. It's the invitation to look at the systems that have been around for that long and ask, like, how the hell do they do that? Can we learn
Mm,
something from them? And not in the sense of we
mm,
must go back to the forest, but in the sense of what are the principles that they're using? Can we use some of those principles too?
exactly. And Elon Musk talks about first principles. One of the few things I've heard him talk about that made sense to me. But let me add one other sort of point because I'm sure some of you are sitting there thinking this is too abstract. This is not real. And I get that, believe me. And I've been wrestling with this for now 2 decades. So it's become my life obsession. So I totally get either skepticism or confusion or just, this makes my brain hurt. But to validate it one step further, I just recently learned about a concept called abductive reasoning. And the key idea about abductive reasoning, it's a form of logic that is not well known. And the idea is that it's not only acceptable, but it's actually intelligent to begin with something that's very concrete and abstract it to a different context. It's a disaster if you start with something abstract and try to concretize it into something specific and concrete. So, for example, someone sitting in the ivory tower dreaming up some new economic system out of whole cloth with no basis in reality is likely to not get it right. But what I'm proposing, actually, I learned through my work managing grasslands, believe it or not, with a man called Alan Savory. And that's a whole long story. We don't need to get into it now. But the point is, this idea came from a concrete practice that has proven itself to work. I've seen it with my own eyes. I invested in it with my own money. And then I had this kind of insight that if this works in this living system we call the grasslands, the Great Plains, all around the world, which is, by the way, two-thirds of the land-based planet, and this symbiotic relationship between herbivores and the grass creates soil, sequesters carbon, retains water, allows for more profitable ranching. It's this incredible symbiosis, win-win-win scenario. I asked myself, well, why couldn't this same idea work for the living system I think of as the economy? And interestingly, so I learned this from Nora Bateson and Zach Bush, who was there, who's one of Daniel Smagdenberger's colleagues. Interestingly said, abductive reasoning is profound, and it's one thing we know artificial intelligence will never be able to do. I don't know why he knows that, and Eugene, I'd love to talk to you about that sometime. But it gave me great confidence that put it this way, this is an ankle. I'm a dog, and this is an ankle that I'm not going to let go of easily.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks, John. I think the relationship between regenerative economics and artificial intelligence is fascinating. I'm actually marinating on the idea of writing a piece titled Regenerative Economics is Superintelligence Alignment. But anyway, we'll
Good.
talk about it later. But yeah,
Yeah.
John, so you gave one example of Alan Savory's work. I wonder if you can make it even more vivid for us and give a few more examples where humans have either had regenerative economies at a societal scale or just some examples where components of this vision are alive today.
Yeah, and I think the way you said it at the end is probably the best we can do, where components of it are alive. Or I often like to say that this is a revolution, not in a new discovery. Like this is not someone invented the microchip. This is a revolution in seeing in a new way. So it's seeing what everyone sees, but in through new lens. And
Right.
if we train ourselves in the patterns and principles of how life works, and then look at everything through the lens, as I do now, I promise you, we'll see the regenerative economy in fits and starts trying to manifest itself everywhere we look. And I'll give you a couple of tangible examples. One is, and this kind of blew my mind when I thought about it. The internet emerged sort of organically out of, I don't know, Eugene, you could explain to me why the internet showed up when it did better than I could, but it did. And the internet itself, forget about the businesses that are on the internet. The internet itself does one thing like orders of magnitude better than we could ever than it was ever possible before, which is it circulates information. It actually can circulate empathy as well, which is interesting. But let's just stick with information. So information is profound. The cosmologists that I've studied with describe information as the layer below matter and energy. In other words, everything arises out of information. Some people equate it with consciousness. So if that's true, and they're smarter than me, so I accept it's true. I think they're actually geniuses. Then the internet has enabled my principle, I call it robust circulation. Think of it as metabolism. It enables the circulation of consciousness, of information in a way that prior to the internet we couldn't even imagine. So it came out of nowhere, uh, potential that no one foresaw before it existed. And it's profoundly important to circulate information, which you all know carries all kinds of opportunity and potential that didn't exist before it. But what happened? Well, we didn't have a framework to think about the internet. What is it? And to me, it's a commons, and it needs to be managed as a commons, just like a fishery. But we didn't do that. So what happened is extractive business models use it for free and have extracted, value from human beings, from our health of our children, from the value of democracy, and built these incredibly profitable business models on top of it. But the internet itself is regenerative. Facebook is degenerative. So that's one example. Another example I always like to use, and again, it's an example of seeing through new eyes. Let me say one other thing. On our website, capitalinstitute.org, we did storytelling for about 6 or 7 years, where we told stories about regenerative projects that we saw. And most of them are kind of grassroots, bottom up. As you would expect, many of them are in food, agriculture, some in finance, some in inner city work. All of them in places where there's high pressure, where there's lots of stress, lots of pressure. So one thing to discern from that is that the regenerative economy is emergent in response to pressure. That's how all systems change. And so you're not going to find it in Palo Alto. You're not going to find it in Greenwich, Connecticut. You're not going to find it on the Riviera. You're going to find it where pressures are greatest. And there's, I think, 50 stories that we've documented showing bottoms up grassroots examples of the regenerative economy seeking to emerge, just like a seedling seeking to sprout. But of course, everyone wants to see a large scale example. And so the large scale example I like to talk about is one that, again, most people that know about it and study it wouldn't call the regenerative economy. But it's the Mondragon cooperative system in the Basque Country in Spain.
Mhm.
Now, this too rose out of pressure. It rose out of the complete poverty of the post-Spanish Civil War period. It was started by a Catholic priest whose motivation was a recognition that the people needed work. They needed it for money and they needed it for dignity. And so it began as this little experiment of businesses that were owned by the employees. So they're cooperatively owned. Fast forward 80 years later, it's, I think, 80 businesses, 20 billion euros of annual turnover, global, um, all kinds of industries, many of them manufacturing, not particularly green. Um, and no employees have ever been fired, ever. There's zero billionaires that have been created, but it's a $20 billion collective enterprise that is obviously profitable or it wouldn't still be there 80 years later. And most people look at it and say, oh, co-ops are the answer. And then they try to lift the co-op model and deploy it somewhere else. I look at it through my regenerative lens and I see a regenerative ecosystem. It's a network of 80 businesses with a shared purpose, which is the Basque culture, the legacy of the Basque culture, which I learned when I visited is old. The Basque language is older than Latin. So this is serious, cultural purpose. And they do a lot of things. There's too much to summarize here, but the gist of it is they manage the 80 businesses for the health of the whole. They govern them for the health of the whole. So if business A has a lot of profits in a particular year, some of those profits are pooled and recirculated for the benefit of business B, C, and D. And in that way, they've created a much more resilient ecosystem of businesses than typically exist in, say, Silicon Valley. And that there's actually physics behind that, which Eugene can explain to us. The path dependency ergodicity is something that actually is designed into the system intuitively. They didn't. I don't think they've studied the ergodicity physics. They just intuited it. So again, this shows me that the regenerative economy is seeking to emerge in response to pressure. It doesn't need the benefit of a well-honed theory and set of policies because it's happening organically, which is what you would expect. That's what life does. It emerges in response to pressure. It adapts and responds to the pressures that it sees. That's what we call evolution.
Yeah, John, I really liked one thing that you mentioned, that it is a way of seeing rather than just a way of doing. And I like this quote that is attributed to Einstein that says, whether or not you can observe, I think, depends upon the theory you use. It is the
Yeah,
theory that decides what can be observed.
yeah,
So a
yeah,
lot of the principles of regenerative economy, they are impossible to observe within the framework of traditional economic analysis because it
yeah,
simply doesn't look at those things in the same
yeah,
way as quantum physics is not applicable to analyzing behavioral science, or the other way around.
exactly.
Different
I think,
frameworks.
your version of the quote is more elegant than the one I use in the course. But,
Mm,
another way of saying that is we're all in, we all want to act. We want to build models, show things can be possible. So build it, seeing is believing, in other words, right? Show me
yeah.
the model. Of
Mhm,
course, that's true. This is not an either or. In fact, one of the things we'll learn when we're in this holistic way of seeing, this is the higher idea, is holism versus reductionism,
mhm,
is that we're surrounded by paradox. And whenever we try to get into the answer is this versus that, chances are we're off track. So getting back to the quote, of course, seeing is believing. Build a model and show me that it's real. And
mhm,
and I get that. And I'm all for building models that are real. But the opposite is also true. It's a paradox. Not only is seeing believing, but believing is seeing. And so if our belief, our worldview is trapped in the reductionist mindset of the early modern age scientific revolution, we're divorced from our latest science. The 2022 Nobel in Physics is for or not quantum, but universal entanglement.
mhm.
And that means everything's connected to everything in simple language. And so the way we the way we you know the way and this is why it's so difficult to quote convince someone who's successful in their field because their worldview, chances are, has is locked in and built by lots of self-confidence that it's correct. Whereas when you go to a community under stress, you don't find that rigidity and self-confidence and arrogance. You find openness and not only a desire and a willingness to shift, but an urgency to find a pathway to switch into.
Yeah, very true. Thank you, John. We're going to move into an exercise, so I'm handing over to Inval. Inval, you're muted. Still muted. There you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, wonderful. I don't know what happened there. All right, so same thing that we just did last exercise. We are holding these.
Wrong window, Inval.
Oh, excuse me. Which window did I share there? I clicked on
We're sharing our Slack.
Google Chrome. There we go. All right. Um, all right. So same thing that we did before. We have all these different dissonant opinions and beliefs. So please write in the chat what are these different beliefs that you're holding. This is about the regenerative economy. And I heard from you guys that you also wanted to hear John's response to your responses. So we'll try to do that if we have time. I see a lot of threes. A lot of threes. All right.
Yeah, you're too polite.
Yeah. Also fours that we don't have the time. I see some ones. Okay. Thank you for sharing that. I know it can be hard to share that opinion in this space.
Mm.
Sorry, I have a. Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if there's an option to answer that was also like with less or like just like an additional comment, but I can write it in the chat.
Yeah, please. I know that we had some people who wanted to share last time. Claire and Joanne, do you want to step in and share a little bit about this as well?
Um, I I'm happy to.
Yeah.
It's, I've shifted my thinking right now to the question at
Yeah.
mind, but it's
Same.
not dissimilar. I
Yeah.
think mostly it's you know, we default to what we know, but when what we need has actually not been part of our education systems, and it actually, the systemic thinking requires these new pathways. We need to look outside of our existing systems. And, indigenous ways of knowing have been helpful, but we're in a reality that is different that all of us are facing. So I just wanted to point to the bioregional approach, which is very much attuned to the land as a whole system, which we're all actually depend and connected to the land, even though we don't behave that way. And so reorienting to actually understanding how the land works as a whole system, upon which any economic activity is attached. And when we don't understand how the land works, and we don't understand, because our culture, all of our behavior comes from that there's a kind of a need to attune, to educate ourselves. And so I just wanted to bring that piece in, because I think a lot of the time we're defaulting to our existing toolbox, and those things need to be part of it. Otherwise, we're just going to keep going back into systems that aren't working. And just to say, I love regenerative economics and how it's having those conversations. I just wanted to highlight the bioregional approach.
Thank you, Claire. John, I'm curious if you have anything to respond to that.
Well, as Claire knows, I fully agree. I described the work. Well, first of all, one of the principles that I talk about of a regenerative economy is the requirement to honor community in place, and bioregionalism is an expression of that. Life life happens in place; it's unique to each place, and then human culture happens in place and is unique to each place, influenced by the geological reality of that place. And what our globalization move has done is it's run roughshod over those unique distinctions. And so rebuilding a healthy economy will need to be done ground up, literally, as Claire described. And not surprisingly, our indigenous elders, um, it's essentially what they perfected over many, many years. And so I see that as a foundation layer of a regenerative economy, but not the same as the regenerative economy, right? It's a piece of a bigger whole.
Thank you. This has been a really interesting conversation, and I've been thinking a lot about uh, kind of what Eugene you were touching on earlier about the sort of natural ecosystem as its own sort of economy. Because I heard somebody talking about that on a podcast, like completely unrelated to economics. It was about fires and how certain trees thrive with fire. Um, yeah, and I'm like, okay, how can we make things more like nature and where in nature might things be different in a way that doesn't work out for us. That's just been where my brain has been this whole time.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the thing with fires also brings our attention to the fact that destruction and death are a natural part of nature and life.
Hmm.
So I think there are some people who approach our social problems from the desire of like, let's have nobody suffer, nobody dies, nobody is harmed. That's not how it works in nature, but in nature it plays a meaningful role. So like when a wolf eats a rabbit, it controls the rabbit population so that more grass may grow and so on. And what doesn't happen as much in nature is just simply permanent destruction of foundations.
And I think what's happening now, I all the time equate to a forest fire. And you could make I make the case that prior to call it the arrival of Trump, all of the, you know, good intention, incremental this, incremental that was just continuing the unhealthy system, and it needed a fire in order for the resources to be broken down and recycled. So what we're experiencing is the forest fire, and it sucks. Um, but it's creating the possibilities that didn't exist before the forest fire.
Yeah, it's. I also find it interesting to observe that, like, on one hand, we're clearly part of an evolutionary process. Like, society is evolving in a certain way, and some things burn down, some things appear. On the other hand, unlike natural systems, we are not slaves to the evolutionary process. We don't just have to wait for natural selection to say, "Oops, this economic system doesn't work." We can direct it intentionally. So that is a superpower that we have that gives us some hope.
Which interestingly has been true since the beginning of archaeologists' study of human history.
Yeah.
Like we have this flawed idea that, we've gone from, hunter-gatherers to agriculture to tribes to nation states.
Mhm.
But it turns out that's not actually the way it works. It's always been way more complex than that, and innovating and adapting. Um,
Awesome.
I closed the breakout rooms, and so people are starting to trickle back in. Welcome. We'll just give it a couple more seconds for people to fully enter.
All right. Yeah, I think I want to ask a last question to you, John, which is surely on everyone's mind here. So, many people are interested in what does a better economic system looks like, but I don't think that a lot of people are waking up and thinking, today I'm going to change the economic system. And to many people, the idea of this may seem removed from their day-to-day work and skills. So, can you give people some guidance? Like, what does it mean to be working on the transition to a regenerative economy, whether it's for a banker or for a journalist or a public health professional or something else?
mm, yeah, great question. No easy answers. Actually, I can make one quick point on the last set of questions. The one that said, "Yeah, this all sounds great, but we don't have time." One of the evolutions in my own thinking, and it may be wrong. I wish it were. I hope it's wrong, but I feel like it's not. Is that we're way late. Like it was too late 20 years ago, and so this system is going to collapse. And so the question of is it too late or is it not too late? If you accept that, you know, kind of like if you accept death, it changes your perspective on everything. And so I feel we're working toward this, co-creation. It's a metamorphosis that we're participating in, and we don't get to know what the butterfly looks like in advance. In other words, we don't know what success looks like. But I take great comfort of this idea of universal entanglement that I mentioned earlier, which tells me that I don't have to figure this out. I don't have to fix this. I don't have to figure out whether there's enough time or not, because whatever I do will affect the outcome. And that's enough. And that's all we can all ask for, which is kind of a good segue, I think, into your question, Eugene. we all want to know what's the most important thing I can do. I want to do what's important to do. But it's not the same, what's important for you, Eugene, to do with a background in technology and artificial intelligence is not going to be the same thing as what it is for me to do. And so if you're inside a big institution, I think the first thing is to recognize the constraints within which you're working.
Mhm.
And there's work to do to nudge big organizations slowly, incrementally in a new direction. That's the work for some people to do. And, I would recommend starting with a group within a big organization. Carol Sanford did work inside Google. I forget which part of it, with great impact that didn't change the direction of Google, probably caused some people in Google to leave Google and do something else. Um, and so I think in big organizations, you have to accept the constraints within which they operate, not be naive about what's possible. If you're an activist, you can do all kinds of different things. If you're an investor, there's a whole field now trying to figure out moving beyond impact investing. What would it mean to do regenerative investing? Maybe that's a good place for me to mention. I'm teaching a course on that starting in February. And if you're working in government or in education, there's just no matter what you do, there's ways to begin to work on this work. And one of the easy places to start is that remembering that any any group of people, whether it's a family or a department of a company or an agency in a government or a school, the health of that group of people is likely has lots of opportunity for improvement. In other words, make that a healthy organism, and regenerative potential will emerge out of that in ways we can't know in advance. That has nothing to do with whether it's in the oil and gas business or the technology business or the yoga industry, or the yoga practice. I shouldn't call it an industry. And so I think if we're creative and imaginative, we can find ways to begin to see what we're doing through a regenerative lens and know that that's insufficient and not enough, and know there's not enough time, and get content with that because otherwise we'll drive ourselves crazy. And know that there's a growing number of people doing the same thing, which has more energy and impact. The great chemist Prigogine said that when a system is far from equilibrium, meaning when a system is in chaos, like it is today, small islands of coherence can shift the entire system. So build an island of coherence in your community. The bioregional work is islands of coherence on the ground where you live, where you care about, where your children grow up. That's all part of the regenerative economy. It's part of this big shift that we've entered, and there's no way, there's no point, there's no possibility of going back to the way it was. We're going through it, and it's a question of what will our impact be to affect the outcome, which is very different than fixing the problem.
Mm.
Yeah, I will also add something to that in terms of like what can you actually do. I would say that absolutely the most important thing you can do is to start building a community of people in this space around yourself. And I'm not just saying this because I run a community. I'm saying this because I've seen what happens when people don't have one.
Yeah,
So seriously, like if you're not in this space and you're thinking, what should I do about this? You should not be thinking, what is the most regenerative job I can find? That is a self-defeating mindset on this path. You have to meet people and establish serious, long-term, reciprocal, mutually supportive relationships with them. And it is through that community that you will even see what are the opportunities for you to take other kinds of
yeah.
action. There is no other path. This is what you have to do. And we're here to support you with that.
Yeah. And hopefully you met some people in your regional breakouts that you can start building community with. So we are at time. Thank you so
Yeah,
much,
just
John.
a quick, can I just quickly reinforce that? And the
Yeah.
next step is to weave these communities together.
Yeah.
The community that you guys have built is amazing. And one of the things I was so excited about with you all joining our courses is to figure out how to link these together. And so the if you go to withlife.net, you'll find the community that we have created out of the courses we've got. So courses are a part of this, but the collaborations that follow them are the most important in putting these ideas to work. And help us figure out how to weave together these two communities just as a place to start, because there's tremendous power between these two communities.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much. Has been such a pleasure. We are at time, and I know that we can keep talking for hours about this, but yeah, with life, join work on climate, wherever it is, build your community. And thank you again, John, for all the time and all the work you've put
Thank
in.
you guys for all your good work. Be
Yeah,
well.
I wonder actually.
Thanks for organizing, and thank you, John.
Yeah, Inbal, I wonder if maybe we could hang around for a little longer and talk to people. Maybe you have a hard stop. I
I
have a meeting with
cannot,
Felix up next.
I cannot, but you guys can
Okay.
hang out and talk.
All right, Felix, is it cool if we hang out and talk with people some more?
Yeah, I'm totally down.
Sounds good. Well, opening the room to free discussion. What's on y'all's mind?
Could be lunch.
Shapet, did they pronounce you correctly?
Yes. Yeah, my big question has been like I've watched systems get co-opted over and over and over again, whether it's the free love movement of the 60s or the Occupy Wall Street, everything gets co-opted and pulled into this system. And I guess that's a fear that I have here is, as we look at these systems, how do we avoid the capital getting into our regenerative economy?
I would love to speak on that if that's okay with everybody.
Sure.
I think I think that because I totally resonate with this fear, and I think the superficiality and pettiness that we seem to be capable of dragging even the most pure ideologies into. I mean, like look at like religions, and the whole concept of a religion that's based all about like neighborly love and care turning into like reason to war against one another. I think co-opting of idealistic um or even, like aha moments by confusion and pettiness is something that we kind of have to like treat as an inevitability in a weird way. It's kind of like, well, that's something that just keeps happening, and like it'll keep happening in cycles until we keep learning our lessons. And then the more we all expand our consciousness to realize that that's what's happening, and that we don't need to keep falling into the same pitfalls, and that we can like teach each other and like be taught, reminded in cycles how to step out of those um kind of pettinesses that can co-opt even the most ideological of like idealistic or pure of movements. And in terms of like specifically regenerative economics and talking about the economic system and that becoming co-opted, like my personal way of couching myself, like sheltering my tender heart against being afraid of that becoming like some weird like fascisty thing, is sort of treating it as kind of like a silent commitment, kind of like, I don't know if you know about Taoism, but one of the things with Taoism is like nobody can teach Taoism. Like the way is just everyone has to like find the way for themselves. And like there's a bunch of clues and riddles about what that looks like, but there's no institution around Taoism because that's like fundamentally against. And that's in a way the same with the regenerative economics. Like I know I'm rambling a little bit, but like just to kind of put a bow on it, I think with regenerative economics, because of its kind of this wilding and this bringing organicness, there's an organizational element for sure, and a coordination and collaboration element for sure, but there's also a sort of like like a wild pivoting that I feel like like relies on our connection to our internal centers, to our intuition, to our internal like wilder parts of ourselves to behave like ecologies and just constantly be in this conflict with our with the structures that be as part of the evolution. I don't know if that is too abstract and makes sense, but and sorry for taking up so much space, but I hope that was like a little bit helpful. It's like the wildness of it means that and like the inevitability of it being co-opted, but then the wildness is we just keep reminding ourselves and one another. Yeah, I hope that.
Yeah, it does make sense, Hadar. So actually, in the book Hospicing Modernity, Vanessa Machado Oliveira talks about the difference between education against ignorance and education against
Thanks.
denial. And education against ignorance is a traditional form of education, like you didn't know and now you know. And education against denial is where you were unable to process certain information or think in a certain way, and now you have undergone a personal transformation, and now you are able to do that. So we need more of that. And yeah, sorry, Johan, I noticed you have your hand up. Would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would like to pick up on what Shapet said about sort of the overtaking of sort of good ideas or whatever was important. And I think there is something into that because when you look at organizations and corporations and institutions or even ideas, they have a life cycle to some extent. I hate to use the word they get old, but sort of I think you can compare the life cycle of ideas and organizations to a human being. Sort of, you have one type of mentality when you're younger, and then you grow older or whatever. And I think that's important to take into the rule set when you define sort of this new type of system, whatever that is. Schmachtenberger, I think it was, had a clear rule that no organization should last more than 2 years.
Did he really?
For this type of reason. This is a bit counter. I'm very much a tradition. I like traditions to some extent, so I like sort of long-term stability as well to some extent. So there's a paradox in here that makes me curious. That's what's my comment. Another thing I would like to throw in is network graph mapping in order to understand complex systems. If that is anything that anyone here has looked deeper at. I have, and I think that's one of the few ways to understand complex systems, sort of, and not fix them because they're hard to fix. There's sort of, but you can understand the type of dynamics that you're up in front, and I think that's useful.
I jump in quickly on that, Johan. The practice of doing systems mapping in this field has become very popular. And as you said, of course, it's helpful. And yet, without the worldview shift, we often find people then using them in a reductionist way. Oh, I see this line goes, to this box, and therefore all you need to do is intervene in that box, and I'll change. And the point is to understand the complexity, not to then use it to solve the problem. And so I have again, it's a paradox. I have a love-hate relationship with those damn maps.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think systems maps are not the same as network maps to me. There's related, but not the same. But I
I'm sorry.
see
Yeah.
this. But there is this problem because most people like to see solutions, right? They like to have answers. And in order to deal with complex systems, you need to hate answers and love questions. And
Right.
that's so contrary to the
Exactly.
human mindset.
We want our goals and metrics.
Yes.
And if
And
the goals don't work, find new goals.
Yes. And if you don't like that, you're a crazy person. That's why I like crazy persons, sort of.
Yeah. Hey, I've got to go get some lunch before my next call, but it's been fun being with you. You can talk about me once I leave, about how crazy I am.
Sounds good, John. Thank you
Eugene,
so much
thank
for
you.
joining us. I think I do have to go as well now. Thanks everyone for joining us. Yeah, hop onto the Learn the Space channel. We can discuss this some more over there. All right. Bye.